I know your time is tight, so we want to get to two subjects. One is the early days in WCW, and I know Brian's chomping at the bit to ask about the Eddie Gilbert matches. I'm going to go first because it's my experience. We've talked about it in various places before, but Kevin Sullivan and I, when Continental was going under and we found out you were available, and I'd been watching the tapes, and we were both fans of yours, and we didn't have the power at WCW, even though we were part of the booking committee. We had the power to put people on television and to book them, but not to give them a push or put them over. So we started giving you the most ass-backwards backdoor push in the history of wrestling, which was basically we booked you as one of the job guys in tag matches, but the other guy got beat. And then when the stars would leave the ring, you would get a chance to drop the Cactus Jack elbow on your partner, who had obviously let you down. And we simultaneously kickstarted your career and shortened it at the same time with all those elbows you had to give.
It was amazing. You explained that to me just last year, and it made perfect sense. Like, I didn't know, like, just, wow, you get this project. You can't get a win. Outside of that, we don't care. We only care about who wins, loses. And it took about 3 weeks for people to catch on. And then as soon as those matches ended, people wanted to see it. Like, it was completely new. And on last year's show, when I was talking about that, including the Jim Cornette imitation, which I think you found pretty flattering.
Yes.
And I went through the conversation you had with Sullivan when I told Kevin. He said, "Brother, what's your finish?" And I said, I wasn't expecting, like, that's the strangest question because I was wrestling the Steiners. Didn't think I would get a move in, let alone a finish. And I said, I drop an elbow? And then, if you haven't seen what I did, an elbow for your finish, then you jumped in and told him all about that. And I did it, in my version of the Jim Cornette voice. But it just was like a magical experience. Like the idea that this guy's getting over by losing, and that it's working and it's clicking with people because we've seen so much. You kind of like a diner, or just 24-hour diner. It's just, absorb, digest, get rid of. And in this case, we had something people were actually holding on to, and I have no doubt. I mean, it was working. And then when we brought it to the Sullivan Slaughterhouse, and then we did start getting a push. People got with it, and they understood when Kevin was.
It got to the point where when the stars would finish winning the match, the people would be like, "Okay, hurry up and get out of the ring, so we see what we we would see this shit." and
the thing was, it kept weak. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
We were progressing with bigger and bigger stars that we were wrestling against, and it didn't matter. People wanted to see the fallout. The big angle was when Mike Rotundo had gone from being one of the varsity club to kind of being in limbo, and they wanted to give him another push and as a babyface, and found a strange way to do it. He teamed up with me, and now instead of turning on a nobody, I was turning on Mike Rotundo. And we had a nice series of matches. I mean, I was able to go around the country and work Mike Rotundo, and we were like booked first or second match, but he enjoyed it. He enjoyed working with me, and we did wild stuff. But I was, I was never reckless with him, and he still remembers it. It's kind of cool that. Yep.
The one thing I got to bring up, because I didn't realize that you didn't know the complete story of this until, like you said, last year we were talking about it, is you thought that WCW was trying to give you the old heave-ho, the old push out the door, as they say, when you were booked against Mil Mascaras at the Clash of Champions there in Corpus Christi, Texas, in the match that still, I think, almost everybody remembers, your biggest high-profile match early in your career. You thought that it was like, oh, they're slagging me off. They're fixing to finish me off. But once again, it was Kevin and I. Jim Barnett insisted, because at that time, he was a legend in the business, but he was still living in the previous decade. And he said because we were, on the Texas-Mexico border, we had to have Mascaras to draw a house. And so then we said, well, who do we put him with? He's not going to sell. He's not going to lose. He's not going to do any kind of business. He's just going to, do his thing. And Kevin and I looked at each other with that grin and said, this is the guy that can get I'll do my Kevin. This is the guy, Jimmy, that can get this over. And we booked you against Mil Mascaras to do the job because we knew, and I'd seen the Nestea plunge. And once again, I apologize for now 25 years later for the lingering effects that this initial push has had on your physical health. But I said, if he does that, nobody will remember that Mil Mascaras was in the ring. And then we followed it up with, you got beat up by the wrestler that was leading the band afterwards. And it was like, it was the Cactus Jack hour, but you got beat up by, you were looking around for the popcorn guy to see if you could do a job for him too. Yeah, what was going through your mind when you were in that ring with Mascaras?
Oh man, I was a downer because I like to have good matches, and when you start out a sentence by saying no disrespect to Mil, that means you're going to bury Mil,
Right. Yeah.
But I knew it was legendary status, but I'd also seen him work in Texas when I was in World Class, and I knew he didn't seem to be interested in the other guy in the ring. And Mil had, I think, missed his flight. And up until about 30 minutes before the match, we booked it, so I was going to get a win over Rick Fargo, who was the initial guy who I had turned on when I faced the Steiners at Center Stage Theater. And so all of a sudden, Mil did make it. We had only a couple minutes to talk. And one thing I just wanted to kick out after the Nestea plunge. I was told in no uncertain way by people above your pay grade there that wasn't going to happen. And I honestly, Jimmy, I'm not just saying this because you're here, but I didn't take into consideration just how important a great call was. And I believe it was you and JR calling that thing.
Yep.
And JR had the famous call with the cell. God is my witness, he's been broken in half. And you cut right to the chase. You said, Cactus Jack is dead. I hit that ground. There's this tiny, hard rubber mat outside, and that was covering the concrete. But I hit that, so it's more or less on the concrete. And I turned, and I actually had a little bit of dry saliva that I spit out. But Terry Funk in the back apparently thought it was my teeth, and a lot of people thought I was spitting out my teeth. And I'd just taken this hideous bump, and then you said, no human being could get up from that, but he's doing it. And that's what people remembered.
Yeah.
Mil got the win, and a lot of people forget about the drummer, too. If we'd just gone off air, that would have been great. But I did put over the drummer. We came back from.
Well, see, that was the thing. That was the thing is to get the band, we had to have the drummer do a spot. That had been sent down to us. As all right, after Mil Mascaras beats Cactus Jack, after he survives a bump that no human being can survive, then we'll send him out to fight the drummer in the band.
They wanted to. It should have been a pull. If they should have been pulled apart. There's no way a drummer. I just, as a wrestling purist of sorts.
Well, he was an independent wrestler. They thought they were good.
Southern, and but he was a one and off for him. He didn't. It was like, the indie guy just beat Shane O'Mac just destroyed 6 indie guys. But in WCW, the indie guy goes over.
Well, that's because they were going to use the guy with the fan,
and the indie guy using his drummer name.
But
Wolf Wild.
At the end of the night, Wolf Wild, Joe Blanchard came over, and it was his ring, and he goes, all right, let me have a go at you. I said, I figure if you're going to put over Mascaras and the drummer, you'll put me over too.
But I didn't realize that you still held somewhat of ill feeling because you didn't realize that working under the constraints we were working under, that whole thing was designed to get Cactus Jack over. It did.
I didn't realize it then. But it's if something stands out in people's minds, that was 1989. It's February of '89. I think 27 years later, people are. It's 27 years later, people. It can't be 27.
It is. Sure is.
Whoa. 27 years later, people are still talking about it. And we did something right. I wanted to. I always wanted to have a good match. And I didn't think we'd had a good match. and so that's why I was down. It was Clash of the Champions. You know, it wasn't a good match at all. You know, it was just kind of one-sided, a few hip tosses, and.
But you know what? You redeemed yourself in years to come.
Yeah, oh yeah. In the bigger picture, yeah. People remember that bump, and they look back, and you know, I think it's available on YouTube and places, and they go, "Oh my God!" Like a lot of people. I guess I did some versions, a few versions of the Nestea plunge, but that was one I came up with, and you know, I was just talking about this last night in Santa Claus because there was a guy in Evansville who said he'd you know, seen me on TV there in '88, and I told the story about you know, how I'd taken that big Nestea plunge in Memphis, and then, you know, forgot that as great an experience as that could be, in that you were wrestling in the same towns every week, and therefore you had to come up with new stuff, and oftentimes you'd face opponents you didn't even see before the show. You didn't even know who you might be wrestling if you're on the undercard. And you go out there and you'd wrestle a guy like Scott Steiner when he was, you know, when he was young, and neither one of you, you know, you were both still learning and trying to call stuff in the ring, and sometimes it wasn't pretty, but you learned every single night. And while that was beneficial, when you did the weekly towns, it give you the same finish in each town. And after the Nestea plunge had gone over so well in Memphis, we get to Louisville, and Robert Phil goes, "Same thing, Jacko?" And I went, "Yeah, same thing." The third night we got to Evansville, and like my lower back was just hideously swollen. He goes, "Same thing, Jacko?" And I look out at Roberts Stadium, and that was the guaranteed $25 payoff. And I was like, "Rob, I don't think I could do that one tonight."
Yeah.
And he sat down next to me. He goes, "You know, Jacko, that's a good idea. There's not going to be a lot of people out there, and you might want to save those big bumps when it matters."
Well, as a matter of fact, you would not be the first one by any lengths that when you got to Evansville on Wednesday night, they geared back a little bit, but you redeemed yourself. Actually, you started redeeming yourself a couple of years later, not even that long, with the matches with Eddie Gilbert. I know Brian